Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. First up, let's continue with our coverage of the ongoing China balloon incident and what its fallout means for the wider US-China relationship. The incident, that is to say the discovery of what US officials believe was a Chinese spy balloon and what Beijing claims to be a civilian research airship over sensitive parts of the United States, and the subsequent decision by the White House to shoot it down, has blown up into domestic political issues in both the US and China, putting renewed strain on the already battered US-China bilateral relationship. In the US, the rhetoric is largely partisan, debating whether the White House managed the incident well or not, but in agreement that China is in the wrong. In China, on the other hand, anger is now growing over Washington's decision to shoot the balloon down. Indeed, Beijing is playing up this aspect of the story. On Monday, Vice Minister Xie Feng, China's next ambassador to the US, expressed, quote, "What the United States has done severely impacted and undermined the efforts and progress made by the two sides to stabilize China-US relations." End quote. Chinese commentators have been quick to blame everything on the US too. Here is just one example from an outspoken academic with over 2 million followers on Weibo. Quote, "For now on and for the foreseeable future, it will be very difficult for US-China relations to return to a positive and healthy development path. The US should be held mainly responsible for this." End quote. State media too is presenting a similar narrative. Quote, "Chinese experts said on Tuesday that it shows that the chaotic, messy, and sick political situation in Washington means that China-US tensions are unlikely to ease in the near future. It also proves that the Biden administration is incapable of setting so-called guardrails for bilateral ties under the complex situation within the US." End quote. Obviously, it's unlikely that any senior US official agrees with this perspective, and even if they did, in the current political environment in the US, it would be impossible to express any regret, let alone apologize, for the balloon incident. Indeed, a US-based Politico writes that on Monday, Speaker Kevin McCarthy and his deputies were in talks with top Democrats about, quote, "a bipartisan resolution to denounce the spy balloon that drifted across much of the nation last week." End quote. If Beijing makes a US apology a precondition for stabilizing relations, it won't happen. Then Beijing can tell its domestic audience that relations remain poor due to the US side. With a possible visit to Taiwan by House Speaker McCarthy this year too, it could well be the case that US Secretary of State Blinken does not make a trip to Beijing at all this year. US-China relations will remain dangerously bad. We note that Bloomberg reported yesterday that China boasted about its ability to shoot down spy balloons that strayed into its airspace in a state media-produced documentary, which it broadcast back in September 2019. Quote, 3 years before complaining that the US overreacted by destroying one of its vehicles. End quote. Okay, now while we are on the balloon incident still, there is a lot of speculative noise online that this balloon mess is a sign that there is political infighting in Beijing and was set up to undermine Xi, or a sign that Xi was not in the loop, or similar rumors. And some serious voices are discussing this. UK-based Japanese-owned Financial Times produced a piece this week called "Spy Balloon Puts Focus on Xi Jinping's Leadership," which quotes a Singapore-based academic who expresses, quote, "An open question is whether Xi Jinping knew about the mission and approved it," end quote, adding, quote, "We don't know whether this demonstrates that the People's Liberation Army is not coordinating politically sensitive missions with the party leadership, or whether the PLA is throwing a wrench into Xi Jinping's effort to lower the temperature of the US-China relationship." End quote. This is quite serious speculation. What I think, and this is just my personal view, that while we should be open to all possibilities, there is currently no evidence to back up these speculations. And once the rumor mill starts up, we should be especially skeptical of more hyperbolic explanations. Some commentators argue that there are more likely, though less sexy, explanations. For example, quote, I think it is much more likely that the surveillance program was approved by the Central Military Commission a while ago, but each mission is not approved at the top level, and they are tightly held secrets even within the PLA-PRC system, so the cadres in the Foreign Ministry may not have even known about them. They have been running these for years, and they have never blown up into diplomatic problems, so there was no reason to think this mission would. Blinken's trip was not officially confirmed publicly, and it is quite possible that the folks running these missions had no idea of the timing. So while it is fun to speculate that somehow there are nefarious internal actors at work to undercut Xi and or his agenda for US-China relations, I am very skeptical it is anything more than unfounded speculation." End quote. Next up, ideology, governance, and economic growth theory. Hey guys, as always, if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit that like button, and anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep China Update sustainable. Subscriber support is the primary mechanism for supporting these episodes every day. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is a massive help. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, this next part is a little bit specialized, and I will do my best to walk through this material without getting caught in the weeds. We're going to look at the role of ideology and theory in Beijing as it applies to macro questions of growth and governance, through looking at a few major recent meetings with top leadership in Beijing. The first was the so-called second group study session of the Politburo of the 20th CPC Central Committee held in late January. The topic for the study session was, quote, "accelerating the establishment of a new pattern of development and enhance the security and initiative of development." End quote. Key takeaways from the meeting chaired by Xi Jinping and attended by top leadership was, according to state-run Global Times, that China, quote, "ramp up efforts to stand on its own feet in science and technology and solve the issue of foreign strangleholds in the sphere, as part of a push for the country to become a global forerunner in key technological areas." End quote. State-run Xinhua wrote that Xi Jinping, quote, "stressed the efforts to accelerate the establishment of a new pattern of development and enhance the security and initiative of China's development." End quote. Now, these sorts of meetings and their readouts are very dry, but critically important. Indeed, often foreign investors are surprised by policy or regulatory moves from Beijing, but had they followed top political and ideological meetings like these, they would have seen the moves signalled well in advance. Some international investors now believe that Beijing is moving back to its older Deng Xiaoping-inspired market reform-focused growth model. However, the readout from this Politburo meeting should dispel this thinking, as the very socialist dual circulation theory, national security, and self-reliance remain major themes. The second meeting we want to cover was held this week. It was also a study session. This study session was attended by the newly elected, or perhaps newly selected is a more appropriate description, members and alternate members of the top Party Central Committee. General Secretary Xi Jinping opened the session with a speech on so-called Chinese-style modernization, expressing ideas including, quote, "Chinese modernization is a new model for human advancement," end quote, and, quote, "Chinese modernization has broken the myth that modernization equals westernization," end quote, and perhaps most tellingly, quote, "we should not only create higher efficiency than capitalism, but also more effectively safeguard social equity and enhance our capacity to safeguard national security," end quote. State media writes that the meeting, quote, "presents another picture of modernization, expands the channels for developing countries to achieve modernization, and provides a Chinese solution to aid the exploration of a better social system for all humanity," end quote. We can see with this language a triumphalist Beijing, confident that it can export its system and compete with the developed world, especially the Western developed world, in the theatre of growth and development, theory and practice. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.